Today, Rinpoche completed the section on the 6 types of suffering and began the section on the 3 types of suffering, showing us how Jamyang Sheba divides it into 2 categories. The first category from the viewpoint of Asanga, and the second category from the viewpoint of the Madyamaka. Once again, we're looking at Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment, and we're specifically looking at this section on training the mind in the stage of the path shared in common with beings of medium capacity. So when we look at that section, there are 4 categories under that category. So the first category is the mental training. The second category is the measure of that mental training. The third category is dispelling misconceptions. And then the fourth category is ascertaining the nature of the path leading to liberation. So those are the 4 categories that are under the major heading of training the mind in the stages of the path shared in common with beings of medium capacity. So when we go to the first category, which is the mental training has 2 sections. First, identifying the mind intent on liberation, and then the method for developing the mind intent on liberation. So after we go through the identification of the mind intent on liberation, or renunciation, identification of renunciation, then we get to the second category of the method for developing the mind intent on liberation, or the method for developing renunciation. So that has 2 categories, reflection on suffering and its origin, and then the second category, reflection from the viewpoint of the 12 links of dependent origination. So these are the 2 categories we find there. And then reflection on suffering and its origin, we find that there are 2 categories. First, reflection on the truth of suffering, the faults of cyclic existence, and then reflection on the process of cyclic existence in terms of origin. So the first category there, reflection on the truth of suffering, the faults of cyclic existence, we find 2 categories. The first category showing the significance of the Buddha's asserting the truth of suffering as the first of the 4 Noble Truths, and then the second category of the actual meditation on suffering. And then after that, we then get into the categories of actual meditation on suffering, and we find the subjects of the 8 sufferings, 6 sufferings, 3 sufferings, and so forth. So Rinpoche just said just a general about the actual meditation on suffering as a note. Dixon. We have gone through the 8 types of suffering, and we've gone over that, and we've completed most of the 6 types of suffering, and now we're in the section under that 6 types of suffering that deals with the summary of the points that have been made. So I'm just trying to find the exact page in English that is on. Nishu Sud. So it's 286, 287. So it must be, I'm sorry, 287, certainly. The Drut Sum. Okay, so in that section, I'm sorry, the summary is the 6 faults comprise 3 types. So it's the 3 types of the 6 sufferings, or 6 faults rather. 287.
동해 주도 동해 마송도 뉴데
Lesso.
코알라 이덴 샤사 메바단 지제
Lesso.
네디 도와 제장 시장 뭐바 메바 니제
Lesso.
네 토마 메바네 쇼보 송드마베 다 동해 주도 송드르레스
Lesso.
송단 담보 코알라 이덴 메바들 진도제 코알라 이덴 메바들 질레 르투발라 이덴 요마레스 르존
Lesso.
르투발라 네 르투발라 이덴 모로와네스 주생 가르스나 르투발라 이덴 모로와네 예양 야다야도 도와오사 르투발 르존부지 투바예네 양도 양 르가발레 냐발레바이나 야도 잠블레 와트리게 이덴 요마레스 르투발라 이덴 모로와네 야다야도 르도와오스 주생 팀바레
Lesso.
페네 셰발라 이덴 모로와네스 전 페바도 녀바 셰발라 이덴 로마레스 네 이덴 모로와네 냐바 메보사 네 페바도 녀바 셰겐디 이덴 요마레스 네 양 녀바 셰겐디 페다게 용 페다게 녀바 셰겐 이덴 요마레스 이덴 모로와네 냐바 메보스
This self-we-amara, gonga me pechi Rinpoche.
당아술 로브제게 페다바
Ale.
페다바 도솔레 타지도 페다바가 봐요 말레스 창선 녀바 지그레스 창선 페다바도 이데 모로원네 녀바 메바
Ale. Sansan Pemba, Sansan Nuba.
녀바 지야 왔다 이러다
Ale. Okay, so Budu. Then
전에 평소 수바 투발라 이데 모로원네 투메도 주어고사 평소 투바 평소 수바 투발라 ane lai löda mei löda chaba jajin la suba tene ge lötu ba ina ya ide rong mares kharas na thume de jo os ya la to so semaji ba ya ge de chad se yo de ya nyawal je dal je torul je mel je ane nyawa de ya da de ya ma dan hal je wa de ko re jo ne ba yo mares thume de jo os 다 로발라 이데 모로와네 네 루메바 로오사 루메바 로오사 루발다 나주냥도 데네 로부제냥도 데데 조로 워텔라 이데 요마르스
Lesso.
네 루메바 루타바르 로부젠데 도마로다 루메바 로오사
Lesso.
워트 너무 디마르다
So Rinpoche said, if you have the English, follow along. So 287. Thus, these 6 faults comprise 3 types. First, in cyclic existence, there is no secure basis that you can count on. Second, however much you may indulge in its pleasures, they will not bring satisfaction in the end. And number 3, you have been caught in cyclic existence since beginningless time. So the first category, in cyclic existence, there is no secure basis that you can count on. It says the first of these has 4 parts. There is no security in obtaining a body, for you discard bodies repeatedly. So again and again, no matter what body we have taken on, whether it's a positive rebirth in the gods or humans, or a negative rebirth, we will discard that body and then have another body that we take on. So there's this process of repeatedly taking on bodies and then casting off bodies. So this is the reason for number 1, that there is no security in obtaining a body, because you again and again have, whether it is a good body or a bad body, discard it and then take another one on. Number 2, there is no security in agents of help or harm, for they are not certain. So it is not, the reason for this is that sometimes people will harm us, sometimes people will help us, so there isn't any certainty as to whether a person will help or harm us. So that's the point of number 2. There's no certainty in help and no certainty in harm. Sometimes we are helped, sometimes we are harmed. Number 3, there is no security in attaining a wonderful condition, for what is high becomes low, The reason for this is that even if we're born in the higher realms of cyclic existence as a god or a human, when that power for that specific life loses its potency, then we will have to take on a different rebirth, and generally usually a lower realm rebirth, a lower rebirth rather. This is the reason for number 3. There's no security in attaining a wonderful condition because we won't keep it. We will once again fall to the lower realms. Then number 4, there's no security in companions. For at death you can go without. For at death you go without companions. There's no certainty amongst our friends or those. Amongst our friends, or security that we can be certain of. That's what it is, security that we can be certain of amongst our friends, because at the time of death we don't have companions. At the time of death we can't bring them with us. They don't go with us together. So that security, we can't feel secure because we have friends, because we're going to die, and when we do, our friends can't go with us. So that's the reason for number 4. Dixon Rinpoche.
Tani bawa rubala ite muruwas. Rubala ite muruwa to what Jima to Mudoa. And then true member was Rubala, Yandu Dene, what the Rubushan Devala, ite Roma, cook, Kakachan, Taba Jandu de Tumaruta.
The Yanjusuna? Kabiore.
There was the Chin Jebadan with Rubala, ite muruanes. Tagi Tatre. Yeah, tomato jo was jibatsaje. Tan rubala idem ruanesa. Do member rosa. That rubajan debala, what they got Rubinan de Ayo so the Idenja Marco Nandu de Mabachan.
Oh, I see.
Ruba member rosa. Nibaje.
The second point is that the security within our life with our companions. So the first was that at the time of death we can't go together. And then the second point that's made about number 4 is that in this lifetime, even if we have someone that we stay together with, we have a companion that we're with, there will be it will become non-existent, that relationship. Just the translators know, because someone will die, one of the other will die, so that will become non-existent. Even that relationship, that friendship, that companionship will be separated, will become non-existent. Dixon Rinpoche.
Oh, Jetta, then Sumba de Remodota, Sumba, Yan Yasan Joates, Yan Yasan Joate, Joa Jubi, Tamang of Sheros, Nisan Joala, Yeden Yomaris, Meli Joalan, Tali Joala, Matanle, Yeden Yomare, and Joa Jubi, Tamang of Shis, Yan Maliji, Yan Halji, Dunrul Joate, Tamebaris, Tamang of Bawosa.
So it says the third of these 4 refers to being reborn again and again. There is no limit to the stream of rebirths. So there are limitless rebirths within cyclic existence.
What did the Dune Samba Shawusata? So
then it says reflect on suffering under this threefold arrangement as well. So there's 8 types of suffering, the 6 types of suffering, and the 3 types of suffering. Rinpoche, the Duyal drew the Somyure, the Tama, the Lamrim Chenmo. The Dash, Dune, John Sampa Jao.
What colors?
The Lamrim Chenmo, Dedash, Dune, John Sampa Jao.
The Dune Sampa Javos, Dunga Drusan Dayama Dudu Genes and Dance.
Then Dudu, Samadan.
son dune santan ya to so santan to de ma son dune santan de son dune ni samba shao
Less so. So reflect on suffering under this so I made a mistake. Reflect on suffering under this threefold arrangement as well. So it says to reflect on the 6 types of suffering, but then also reflect on this broader explanation, which has the 3 types of the 6 faults as well.
Ta Lamrim din de lo de Lamrim din de son sha Lamrim din ni ba shi din le sa shi din le ne ba me ba ta ngo ba me ba ta ngo ba me ba ta lu ya na ya do wa ta ya da ya do ni ta jo wa ta ya da ya do tu me do jo wa ta zhu me bi ne ba zhu song ba ne sa zhu shi din le song yo res te song ba de son de dute ma dugi na son de negres son de dute koala yiten shasa me batan koala yiten shasa me batan tambuche koala yiten shasa me ba ana wo telje jama so ti de wa je tan she jan ngo bi ta me batan ni ba Dual Cessation in the mobile movie Tibetan. Toma Meban Shubos, a young in San Juas, what the Toma Mebane, no what the military holiday, what the Sunday Samarbe. What the Larry Chunal do.
Then the Lamrim din the Chenmo long Yaja Suralam.
That do not do the shading song, or shading less. Never maybe doing, over maybe doing, Louis on the other doing, ye on your son Joe, tomato Joas, true maybe never true, shading the son those at that.
Okay.
Shading the true son, but the mason do son doing this. Koala eating Shasa Mabadans, Tangazo Ewa Shiji that Madba. Tea the watches on Shijang Oba Meban Nije. Toma Meba ne Lalaje Meljo de Joel Toma Meba. Shuba what the Sondoma Dunosa.
So when we look at the medium stages of the path to enlightenment, we find a quote from Nagarjuna's letter to a friend that lists these 6 faults. It makes the point of these 6 faults and says the fault of uncertainty, the fault of insatiability, the fault of casting off bodies repeatedly, the fault of repeated rebirth, the fault of repeatedly descending from the high to low, the fault of having no companions is where we find these 6 faults that are presented here. So we find this in the Sheching Lei, Sheching Delpi Lei. So we find the 6 points presented directly in the letter to a friend. I was just looking at the front here, and it's from a commentary, but Rinpoche said that in the direct letter to a friend, we find these 6 faults presented. And then it goes on to say that the 6 faults comprise 3 types. In cyclic existence, there is no secure basis that you can count on. And then number 2, however much you indulge in its pleasures, they will not bring satisfaction in the end. No matter how many types of happiness you can have in your lifetime, when it is over, that happiness can't bring you any kind of satisfaction when you're have moved on, when you've passed on. And then the 3rd is you have been caught in cyclic existence from beginningless time. So since beginningless time, we've had rebirth. We've been born as humans. We've been born as gods. We've been born in the lower realms of cyclic existence. So this is the meaning of the 3 that are presented in the medium stage of the path.
That tombo never maybe never the Lord Jigado, Jigo, the Ladion, the Sivdo.
Okay.
Never maybe Gil Tombo, Lutubala, Demon, Yana was high Lutan, May Lutan, what the Lutubala, Eden Maris, Luyana, the Donoration, high Lundo, May Lundo, Yan National Jim, National Lundo, or Meljo, the Luyana, the was. 담부지
Less so.
펜네 쉐발라 펜바다 너바 쉐발라 이데 모로레스 메제 이데 모로 주센 가르스나 나 이데 모로 와네사 펜네 쉐발라 이데 모로 와네 파부다 마초만 좋아다 파드 버차야 마드 초마차네야 네 다시 드니 차니 다차야 조수 네버메버 오사 네버제 단 번수도 투발라 이데 모로와네 조사네 마사 동안 오사 번수도 사이 르덴 번수도 메 르덴 번수도 어떤 투바이나 이데 요마레 야시네 네 내송 동로레스 동안 오사 루발라 이데 모로와네 루메번 루오사 나 조부 다녀도 루발라 이데 로마코 루메번 루레스 마르베 다바냐도 데도 마르와다 원로 오사 오 수마야 예상조와데야 예상조와데 주비 타멍아바데 대다야 양성바샤오사 수마야 예상조와데 예상조와데사 저와 주비 타멍아비셔사 예상조와서도 말제 할제 what 나송을제 타요 말레스 어떤 거지 주세는 수시고도와
Okay. So, in the medium stage of the path to enlightenment, we find a clear explanation of the. It says the first in cyclic existence there is no secure basis that you can count on. The first has 4 parts, so we go back to those 4. There is no security in obtaining a body, for you discard bodies repeatedly. So we will sometimes have a human's body, and then we won't, and then we'll sometimes have a God's body, and then we'll sometimes have a body of a lower realm rebirth. There's no security or certainty. There's no certainty if we have this body, because we will discard it in the end. So that's the best way to translate it. There's no certainty when we obtain this body, because we've been a God, we've been a human, we've been in the lower realms of cyclic existence, and we've discarded all of those bodies. So that's the reason for the first, and that's the Rinpoche's commentary together with the points made in the medium stages of the path. Number 2, there is no security in agents of help or harm, for they are not certain. So when we look to the medium stages of the path, we find what is the meaning of this. It says that our fathers become our mothers, mothers become their sons, enemies become friends, friends become enemies. So we have no security or certainty in agents of help or harm, because we see these changes that can take place. And then number 3, there is no security in attaining a wonderful condition, for what is high becomes low. Even if we have become a God, or we now have a human realm rebirth, we have no certainty, because in the future we will fall to the lower realms of cyclic existence. So what is high becomes low means that. So there's no certainty. We aren't certain we have this. So the yiden is security. So there's no security because there's this uncertain basis. It's not a permanent basis. Then there is no security in companions, for at death you go without companions. So this our companions cannot stay. We cannot stay with our companions permanently. So that's the meaning of no. We can't stay with our friends permanently.
다 동에 제사 주찬데 다 동에 송셰바도 말이야. 동에 송셰바도 가둘렌데 동에 송셰바들레 안에 어떤 자제베 사디로도 오미로스 니시도 사등아 상가게 오버자 샹사든 여사사 주로 사득일로다 너 오마빌로 마데마가 또 오마빌로 니 요레스 사진이 되거든 자집에
So
사드다 오마빌로 니 사진이 되거든
so Asanga, the Shansa, they, and then the Umapilu, the Sulodru.
오마다오데
Uma, Su.
오마 라주바다 타주와도 그거데 도와도 등에 주시고로.
Okay. So we've completed then the section on the 8 types of suffering and completed the section on the 6 types of suffering. And now we move on to the 3 types of suffering. And Jamyang Sheba says that we have 2 different categories in here. We have categories of the 3 types of suffering according to the view of Asanga, and the text used the Bodhisattva levels, and then the Madyamaka view, and then the Madyamaka view of the middle way autonomy school and the middle way consequence school. So these are the 2 points that Jamyang, I think they're categories or headings in Jamyang Sheba's commentary on these 3.
어제 동부 사디 로들한테 어제 자지 사지
Dun.
사디 로들 네 사지 오들 좀들 고아 뒤에저로다.
Okay, so in the first category, which is the Asanga's Bodhisattva levels or Bhumi's text, there's 7.
어제 뒤는 너는 다 담부도 어때 가서 주의 동에 시대 좀 말면 주의 동에 안에 토아탄유 토아송들레도 토아송 담보 토아도와 말바 주의 주의도와 동에 토아 동에제 안에 어때 토아탄유 어때 송들 뒤는 담부송도 어때 해도
Then the Dun, the top, the Yanjur Sunlan, so the
Sumba Dunga Sung Gombane, Sumba Dunga Sung Gombane, what then Matambo Jew do what they go Pena, Jew do what the shade go Pena, Pimi can, Deshindo, Pimigan Deshin to Sawala, and Chusi what dona, the one who are Tabune. 코아바나지 소아도와데스 유이동에서 오데레스다 소아도와데네 나시바나야 등에제베 유이동에로스 유이동에서 오데서 도와다
Then they tamu the Jamyang Sheba Sachi tamu the Mingare, the Dun Tambo,
담부들래
Soa Dewa,
다 담부들 오데
Soa Dewa.
유이도와 등에 주도 말바 주도와지 then 예바 등에지 등에 초당용 어디 손들에 등도 초송들에 다 초송 초도와 초등에 초당용 손들 어디 해등도 메드 가가래들마도 다 동부 초도와 레거도와 그나 페미가 대신도 차와 당아서 주불 나사를 지어봐이나 안에 신도 차와라 춥다봐이나 춥다봐이나 안에 내거질 대화는 차거든 대화는 요아레스 유이도 와서 왔다나 버지레스 추시 왔다나 대화 나왔다 버레 추시원 추 담부 쳐봐이나 대화는 처음 요로다 대화 나왔다 버레스 네 코아바나 초아도와데스 어디 코아발 코드겐 속에 어디 들 초아도와스겐 어디레스 네 나시바나스 어디 도와데 시바나 양동에 자는 거레스 주동에서 도와 담부 도와지 양동에 전에 주동에서 어디레스 주동에로 어떻게 갈래지 주나 좋아도 도와치도 주도와
Then Tsoa Dewa, Tsoa Dugya, Tsoa
Tanyo da
Danyo.
tambu tsoa dewa de, tsomo dewa ju dewa derwa, ju dewa.
So we find when we look at the feelings, we have happy feelings, we have suffering feelings, and then we have equal feeling. So in terms of feelings, and that can be physical, emotional. So in terms of feelings, it goes through these categories, showing that there is the feeling of happiness, and then the suffering of change takes place, and then it becomes an actual suffering. So that happiness turns into, or changes into, a form of suffering. So it says, pleasant feelings experienced by beings in cyclic existence are like the pleasure felt when cool water is applied to an inflamed boil or carbuncle. As the temporary feeling fades, the pain reasserts itself. So if we have some kind of a sore, and we put cool water on it, we can then at that point feel some kind of happy feeling, some kind of pleasurable feeling. And then the suffering of change takes place, and then there is a painful feeling there. So this is what is meant by that that happiness is temporary. So the suffering of change will occur because because of that temporary nature. Then it's soa dewa, it's soa dugya.
Well, that the tawal chut taba ina o the one that you wrote the Bijaro. Tanga to Langa Droba ina, and Langa Droba ina Kalioro, Dunga Uruta.
Lesso.
And the day Shabayana, the Wajung Dua, what to Jew the was of the Surista.
Lesso.
And then Langa Drona Kalikaro, and Dunga Euro.
Lesso.
Ya Deshana, the one that you marvel. Yan de Jana Dunga Chanus.
Lesso.
You Dunga. And they are Yama Tasuna. And the Tissinam de Marvel, Tissin de Chibula Euro. Young Jude in the Changuro. What in the Pupum was Ado?
The gare?
Tramat and Sisi. And then
umbrella.
Umbrella. Was Yamasasun, Sibila Euro. Then Jude within the atomic.
Lesso. So we have here one example given by Lama Tsongkhapa that says, the pleasure felt when cool water is applied to an inflamed boil or a carbuncle. As the temporary feeling fades, the pain reasserts itself. So you splash water on this sore, and then you temporarily feel this feeling of happiness. But then that feeling of happiness that changes and then turns into a suffering feeling. And then there are many examples when you're going for a walk, for instance. Initially you're going for a walk and it's nice, but then you become tired, it becomes difficult, and you want to sit down. So the suffering of change has taken place because the walk, which was something which was causing happiness, is then transformed into something that's causing pain, causing suffering. So then you sit down, and if you sit for too long, you want to get up. So the suffering of change has taken place because your what was this feeling of happiness of sitting down has now become a suffering that you want to be relieved of, so you get up. And then so that is one example. And then another is that if, for instance, you're sitting out in the sun, it can be very pleasant when you're sitting out there. But then you start to get too hot, and the sun's rays become too much. So you then want a parasol or some kind of umbrella to put over your head. And then you do that, and then you want to be back in the sun. So you see how this emotion has changed. You went from being happy in this pleasant in the sun to that becoming a form of pain or suffering and wanting to then have it change. So this is what the suffering of change is referring to. And then there are many different examples that we can give to explain this.
Then Nyan Jibur, Nyan Jiburo,
And then, for
What to
instance,
say that?
also sleeping is very, very pleasant. But if you sleep too much, or too long, then a suffering can take place. Do it?
Sit.
Okay.
What the devil,
And then again, we're sitting in a comfortable chair, and we feel very happy and feel very comfortable. But then we start to feel that we don't want to stay there anymore, and we have to get up. And now that suffering of change has taken place, where we went from it being pleasurable to it being a state of suffering. There are many examples if give to explain the suffering of change. But then a doubt arises. Sensampa. Then the not only feeling. What Gundunga Tamalo, what the Tua is Laugures. Don't somebody be sent there, Tua is Laugures. Tua the Kala Misa Udea, Tua de Laugures. Lesser. So a doubt arises then, and it's presented then here in the text. Is this only this suffering of change only related to actual feelings, actual feelings itself, or can it relate to something else? So then we find this presentation given here that says, let me just read it. This is called the suffering of change, and includes not only the feelings itself, but also the main mind and other mental processes that are similar to it, as well as contaminated objects, which, when perceived, give rise to that feeling. So here it is stating that the mind and the mental factors also have this suffering of change. It's not exclusive to it's not exclusive to just the feelings itself. So when we look at the main mind, there are 5 things that accompany it. Let me see if these are the ones that are. Yeah, this isn't it. So that accompanying the main mind, there are 5. It's just send mind, mental factor. Just give me one moment. I'm sorry. It's right here. If I can't find it right away, I'll just get the. Here we go. Jamba, Mupa, Jamba. No. Where are they? Feeling, okay, so I'm sorry. So when we look at mental factors, so we have mind, and mental factors. Here it's calling them main mind and mental processes. But what that's referring to is mind and mental factors. So we have the mind itself, and mental factors, when we look at them in terms of the omnipresent, Sorwa, Duje, Sempa, Dripa, Yila, Cheba. Okay, less so.
Choan Dushi, Semba Sen Le Marve. Semba dan Choani Choa dan Chomba Demi Semba Chu Choa Yimbata. Choa Semba Demi Send Chu Choa Yimbata. Choa dan Chomba Demi Send Semba Yina, and then Choa dan Semba Demi Send Chu Senjun Yimbata. Choa Yimbeja. Send dan Senjun Gawama Yimbata. What the Don of Doban. Later, your moon gaze at the inside of Soso in Beijing is at the Vagina. Later, your moon Gawares, the inside of Soso in Beijing, using Cosa. Wonder to Bandota.
Later, Yomo Gawayan Ganges in a sentence.
Soso, Senjun Nacho, Najunga Saji, non the Simon Gawain, but that. And this Toa somebody was sent there, Toa is a sense and ruled. So somebody was sent to his enjoying better. Toa image.
I see.
I see. Toa give the Toa Ibata. Toa the Wagi you the carpet region in Marbe. Region Gelatin at the Watchego Marbe. Or the Reja Chu Toa the Wagimbata. Toa the Wagi image. They do the. Quand le mine ji yu sa ji na jang yu de nge los. Quand le mine ji yu, soit de wat karl ten chegre, rija yidon la ten, soit de wat je de marbe. Wat rija tu je, ne soit imbata, soit de yu mejer. Wat de tona, an zo tu zo ni mi shi imbata, zo ni mi shi yu mejer, wat de tan son to mu do ta.
Okay, so that's why we need tactile sensation. I see. Okay. So when we look at omnipresent mental factors, there are 5: feeling, discrimination, intention. Intention is karma, contact, and then mental engagement. So it's saying that in this text that the mind and then the mental factors are divided, also have this feeling. Also have this suffering of change. So there's a debate that takes place that's saying, so is the feeling and tactile, is the tactile sensation, which is the happiness of a tactile sensation, which is the object the happiness of a tactile sensation, is it a feeling? And it's saying the problem with that is that they are stated in other texts as being mutually exclusive, that karma and afflictions are mutually exclusive. And then here, there were a couple of different points that Rinpoche made that could be contradictory. And so so then is the happiness that's perceived by the mind, is that happiness then a mental factor? So the mind is happy. At that point when the mind's happy, is that a mental factor because it's a happy feeling? But mind and the Sendan Semjong Gyawayan, so mind and mental factors are mutually exclusive. So is the happiness a mind feels a feeling of happiness? But it can't be, because the happiness of the mind is that mental state, is that mind state, and then the mental factor is something that seems to be separate. So these are just debates that take place. Then the Parshin Chitan Leda and Yomon Gyawayin.
Join says you are Tante Katulte, they are Tuakonam, Jew do what the Tuakona Mares, Jew do what Tuakona Maiji, that on somebody Jew do what, that on somebody be Saint Saint Nan dance, 대단 소바 때문에 생대야 유도와 이 생존권과 유도와 일라고 되대로 그들로 되려고도.
So this is not something that is exclusive to feeling. It's something that pervades all of the mind and mental factors. So the suffering of change, this is called the suffering of change, and includes not only the feeling itself, but also the main mind and other mental processes that are similar to it, as well as the contaminated objects which, when perceived, give rise to that feeling. So if we look at the mind and mental factors, is this then, and we look at it in terms of happiness, are these happy feelings, can we say? So this is what we need to look at. So we're going to take a short break. So it is not only the feeling itself that we apply the suffering of change to, but all of the mind and mental factors, as well as the objects contaminated objects that one perceives under the category of the suffering of change. So the mind, the mental factors, and then the objects that are perceived by that, the contaminated objects that are perceived. These are.
And the same in Batas and out the Jatomaruda in Zonda. Takan Chibi use I take no law, you do I love this. Taking a Zuzi machine use Zuz Sajiro, the Zuzi machine in Batas Thousand Ramade. So I use Sajide, so I Zuzi machine use Sajizude, Zuzi machine in Batas. What did not to worry the town.
So when we read this, we have a lot of doubts that come out. So we say the mind is the suffering of change, the mental factors are the suffering of change, the object that is apprehended is the suffering of change. So for instance, the form that we apprehend by our eye consciousness is the suffering of change. So all these doubts arise when we say, if mind and mental factors are mutually exclusive, then the suffering of change is a feeling of some sort. Then how can this be? So we just have to investigate, and that way we can clarify any doubts that we have.
What this is not to do what Jamyang Sheba to Jamyang Sheba with the Tua Yenda Mai Kisha
So in Jamyang Sheba's commentary, he doesn't get into this. Is this a happy feeling or not a happy feeling? So it doesn't get into this debate about feeling, which is a mental factor, and so forth.
Talani change it on our change your channel and Tua the water Tumba Dembe, Sensation down, Tua do you, Sajikalo, Tua do non do his, Tua do my laws.
Ale.
The non do, the non the my. What the song do, what the Beijing each other can double. Beijing what the Toina, the Sanjuan Gurota, and the Sanjuan is a marrow, the Sanjuan on Dubains, you there, Sanjuan on Tuan on Dubains, Laures.
Lesso.
What Naurajo to Sora, what they did it.
So we also find from Ngawang Rapje Chenpo a question that says that the Ngawang Rapje Chenpo that Sowa Dewa.
So the somebody was sensible to so do I my so not do it. So the use I did so do my so do not do is what the laws of the Abdu.
The yu sache yu the ju dungyo so
You don't do it, you don't mind.
okay ju mayan okay
Little
that's-
somebody with sense and look all the non do it, so my is low res.
less so so that
The law do the best is a double.
so Ngao Rapje Chenpo has a similar sentiment as Pension Sunandrapa that it says that the contaminated object is not the suffering of change because it's not a feeling and then Pension Sunandrapa says that the suffering of change is a feeling of some sort, is a happy feeling. So the suffering of change is defined as a happy feeling, and then this is where the debate comes up. If the suffering of change is defined as a happy feeling, and then a feeling is a mental factor, mind and mental factors are mutually exclusive. So just that's a synopsis of the problem. And so this section right here gives rise to certain doubts about what it means. So if we can know these, that it makes us more content. Understand these things, it makes us more content.
What the laws or what the that done ma that doing a song Zai Je tayu dungwa la de la chachu su juji ji riba dang riba cheba na che dunghe wa jin dos ane cawa dama danda yueba ina ane caga chu danda dawa ina ku dunghe chen ruya maru dunghe si danda baji res ane nga su de chen na dunghe re dunghe ji dunghe ane runa dunghe marwe de na ya de chena dunga re no o dunga to su yin so is there de chayu dunga te ne chachula subi so to wara chachula subi juji ji riba da cheba na che dunga wa je do se chachu ta ba ina no dunga che ba cha ro so te to su ju dunga so to su res ta jin do Choa dunga sheba shata choa dunga wadal choa dunga lao kuris choa dunga sikatanishi sikres
Leso.
sheba shate na jeba na tatabi choa na jeba na jeba zangje le sen dunga shebi shir dunga des jeba zangje le dan sen dunga wa sheba yinzang dunga ji dunga se wadija kuris ta Kemi Suzy no example marve example Kemi Suzy Kema tabal nasa de jonsona choa dunga yongro wat pajaba insere teon choa jibu meba ne hataros teon dunga teon choa dunga jibu mares taton somba dembe sen jona ta quand le jibu yu saji ngalo de choa dunga is lawurs wat songal do ta
So number 2 is the suffering of pain. When a painfully inflamed boil makes contact with an irritant such as salt water, it is agonizing. This is how you recognize the feeling of pain. Painful feelings like this constitute the suffering of pain, because as soon as they arise, the body and mind are tormented, as in the case of kidney pain. Also, as explained above, the suffering of pain is not just the feeling, it is also the mind, it is the mind, the mental factors, and then the contaminated object which when perceived give rise to that feeling. Rinpoche explained that to be the meaning of the final sentence there. When we have some kind of a pain in our mind or our body, some kind of suffering that is pain in our mind or our body, emotional pain or physical pain, then this is that feeling of pain is the suffering of pain. Then Jamyang Sheba Sache, the Ngatsu Kabale song.
Saji the Tuason to Songre Sadi lo domi lo nichi, sadi lo the du no ne ju dunga ji dunga, and what the Tua Daniel son re, what the son the Tata de Tua dunga ji dunga the Marve, what the Tua dunga ji dunga so what there is dunga ta ngaso nyeba ina dewarota, ya nyeta na dunga yungwa, dunga ji dunga Marve, what the Mambu Jaga duata, Nyama Tsona. 오늘 전화 대체나 야두게 저거로 초아동에 셰바샤데스 나제 제바나 르세동아 셰비셰 동에데스 데들 나제바나는 르던센레 동에 저거스 동아 셰바 동에 제바셰바 인상 동에 라그레스 동에 지동에 케메 소즈제모 example 케마트바 나사는 당송나 안오데 나사 요로데 라브레스 example 대야 좋아 지부 메바네 하타로스 좋아 등에 대야 좋아 지부 말든 송바된비 센서용 걸로 좋아 등에 일하고래 간라 미비 사지도 줘야 좋아 등에 하마 네 유등은 러버나지레스 Hataros, what the Rabudu, what the Saint Magina, what the Bumudua, what the Soma Najin, Sanat and Twag, you reject to call a toy in Lavudua, Saint a toy in Lavudua, or there's the knowledge or they will do some of that.
So I
told some of them sense and call toy my toy non doings. So 유사지데 소는 두버 소마인스 what is in something
So when we look at these mind and mental factors and these objects that are perceived, we have to say that it's the feeling that it is an accompanying the mind. So this is how we would word it. It's a feeling that's accompanying the mind, accompanying the perceived object, accompanying the mental factors. So this is how we would explain that. So just back to this, the suffering of pain, when a painfully inflamed boil makes contact with an irritant such as salt water, it is agonizing. This is how you recognize the feeling of pain. Painful feelings like this constitute the suffering of pain because as soon as they arise, the body and the mind are tormented, as in the case of kidney pain. Also, as explained above, the suffering of pain is not just the feeling. So it's also the mind and mental factors and the contaminated objects which, when perceived, give rise to that feeling. We would say the same thing about the suffering of pain as we did about the suffering of change at that place.
What so you do and you do any taje, then so don't you do. But the new kind of my so do I my so do my be. The new kind of my tree do Tawatabune. Sabat jibi chua danyu des sabat jibi chua danyu res danyu ane dewaya mari dungaya mayi bi chua dele chua danyu la res danyu de ne ngene jesun jiyus le dan yomo mogi ne ngene jesun jiyu le dan yomo bi gyunda ji guide je wata ne ngene jesun jiyu duji ji dungaya los chaban duji ji dungaya chaban duji ji dungaya so what res chaban duji ji dungaya
So we've gone through, if we're going to Jamyang Sheba's commentary, the categories of 7, we've gone through the feelings of happiness, feelings of suffering, and now we arrived at neutral feelings. And this neutral feelings is under the suffering of conditionality, the pervasive compounded suffering section. It says, contaminated neutral feelings are like an inflamed boil, which is in the contact with neither soothing nor irritating substances. Because these feelings coexist with dysfunctional tendencies, they constitute the suffering of conditionality, which, as explained above, does not refer to feelings alone. So these are the karma and the afflictions that give rise to this suffering of conditionality.
내가 초와 집은 뭐야와 하다로스 초와 당뇨 대 초와 집은 말에 초와 당뇨도 초와 대비 산산중 걸 초와 당뇨래 초와 당뇨 유사제 대한 초와 당뇨래 하만하지라고 그래서
And then it says does not refer to feelings alone. So this is saying that the equal feelings are, it's the word we use for equanimity. So equal or neutral is used here. Neutral feelings are also in the case, not just the feelings, but also in the mind, the mental factors, and then the contaminated objects, which when perceived give rise to that feeling. So as before stated, it means the same here. It means the same as was stated before in the suffering of change section.
So
number 3 is finished. So we've gone through the first 3 under the section of the Bodhisattva levels, and we went through the suffering of change, a happy feeling, the suffering of pain, a painful feeling, and then the suffering of conditionality, the neutral feeling section. So now we move on.
Shimana ji saben jesun jeyu nas saben jesun jeyu na gundun juyu nengala da demba gundun juyu nengala da dembas ane wote donge shimi jodan yomo shimi juyu da wote gundun juyu nengala da dembas segres wote nengala da demba wosa wote wote tuasun sarda.
So we've. So then it says, insofar as the suffering of conditionality is affected by previous karma as well as the afflictions, and coexists with seeds that will produce future suffering and affliction, it coexists with persistent dysfunctional tendencies. So the suffering of conditionality coexists with the previous karma, and then the afflictions that then produce future types of suffering, and then also more afflictions, which then produce future karma, which produce future suffering. So this is the suffering of conditionality, and the kanga sumba. Okay, and this is covered by number 3, neutral feelings. Now we move to 4.
Okay. Jibatel what is Tsoa le Nengan Jesunes, Tosonji, Tosonji, Toson Debata Jeba, Toson Debata Jeba Jebasa, Toson Debata Jeba, Jebata, Toson Debata Jebata, Toson Debata Jeba Jegare, Srava, Jebata. Tena Tadam go between us, Tena Tadam go between 도선 저버도 제가 녀모체 되는 인상 때 가비 주네 가비 주 되는 된거 놓으셨다 가비 주네 대들 좋아도와 대들 좋아도와서 되는 말 내가 놓으셨다 대들 좋아도와 대들 좋아도와서 대들 좋아도와 대들 초와도와 제바나 차바 제바다스 초와도와 제용도 달라데네 뇌차 제용레스 차바 제바다스 동해 제바나 콘트 페와다스 동해 제소나 어달라데네 콘트데야 페용레스 도도 가야 메비 내게네 두비 초와다뇨로다 내게네 두비 르라 네 마타발라 Taba susun simbas, Chua Tanyo la tene, Taban zibi tanzi tang, Tekunani la mo mariba tang, Lendi la mo mariba tu jengures, Temu jeba juros, Teba tu jibatere.
So number 4 in Jamyang Sheba's outline shows how, in dependence upon the happy feelings, in dependence upon these feelings, these three types of feelings, the three poisons arise. So in dependence upon a happy feeling, the poison of attachment arises. In dependence upon an unhappy feeling, or a painful feeling, then anger, the poison of anger arises, and in dependence upon this neutral feeling, ignorance arises. So we find then number 4 is this connection with these three types of feelings to the three poisons. So it says, thus attachment increases when a pleasant feeling arises, and hostility increases when pain arises. Ignorance increases when you misapprehend the body, which is part of a dysfunctional situation that is neither pleasant nor painful, as permanent when it is in fact impermanent. Attachment gives rise to suffering such as future rebirth in the 5 realms, in the realms of hell beings, hungry ghosts, animals, humans, and deities. Hostility brings about suffering such as the sorrow in this life as well as the future suffering of the miserable realms, while ignorance acts in such a way to maintain in existence the sufferings produced by the other two, attachment and hostility. Therefore, attachment ceases when you see pleasant feelings as suffering. In the case of painful feelings, hostility ceases when you consider that since these aggregates of body and mind are a collection of causes for suffering, painful feelings arise from them just as physical affliction does. In the case of neutral feelings, ignorance ceases when you see that they are impermanent, inexhaustible, and perishable in nature. In this way, you prevent the three feelings from giving rise to the three mental poisons. I have determined these points in accordance with the compendium of determinations and the levels of yogic deeds. So we see that in dependence upon happy feelings, so for instance, we have some pleasurable feeling, and then we become attached in some way. And if we have some painful feeling, we become very angry in some sort of way. And if we have this neutral feeling, this gives rise to ignorance. And the ignorance that's being referred to here is the ignorance that grasps at this is things as being permanent. The ignorance of the karma and its results, the ignorance of the nature of reality. So these are the types of ignorance that arise from these neutral feelings. So let me just make sure all the points were made. So it says, grasping at the body as being permanent is ignorance. Ngay tsampa diksan.
Wata ngaba dalwa, ngaba tasakdu nyunyu madamudu. Ngaba nengele jesunes, ngaba nengele dosha ta hondu nengele jesu 네 어디 동에서 내가는 제주도 간다서 내가는 제주 데레스 달라 내가는 제주네사 자지베 내가는 제주 대간도스 달란도 차지네 심마 로앙아 저라 수비 동에 제라사 뇌샤라 때네 안에 나루송 안에 살하마인 두바이자 되는지가이 말에 안에 하마인 소도 담아는 도와리 주지고 저러다 뇌샤라 때는 도와리 주지고레스 로앙아 지고레스 하마인 하노 두바이나 로앙아 지라스 뇌샤 그주시 발라테네 는 로앙아 이초발랭 그레스 나지라스 시당기네 데레 냥에 수당 심마 냥루이 동에 지지 콘조게 되는 천들레 네 냥에라 소비 동에 몸을 용거래 네 심마 냥루를 지그레스 냥송 니와이다 돈루를 지그레스 냥루 지지 ತಮೋಗಿನೆ ತೆ니지 집이 되니까 마동 셔쇼바오사 ತಮೋ도 왔다 초와다뉴데 초와도 왔다 되니까게 tenji namores 초와 단요라 때네 도와용 그래 동해용 그랬어 뜨무기네 테니지 올라서 나도 지지 뜨무기네 스타 뜨무거래 뜨무스 뜨고나니는 뭐 말이 봤다 렌들라 뭐 말이 봐봐 테니지 집이 동해니까 마동이 셔를 쇼바오사
두차
뜨무 되게 뜨무 여차 공도 뜨무 말이봐 뜨무 되게 네 좋아도 와도 동해니까 또 어디 때는 뭐 그래서 말이봐 뜨무기네 좋아도 와도 동해니지 집이 동해니까 마동이 셔를 쇼바오사
Dan dan drapudu.
고텔라 때는 좋아도 와요 동해용 그래서
Lesso. So number 4 actually ends at as permanent when it is in fact impermanent. So that's number 4. All the commentary is exact for number 4. It's just it ends right there. And then number 5 starts, and it's the what these give rise to. So it says attachment gives rise to suffering, such as future rebirth in the 5 realms, the realms of hell beings, hungry ghosts, animals, humans, and deities. So if we look at the 6 realms of cyclic existence, and we take the demigods and put them into the gods realm, then we have 5 realms of cyclic existence. It says hostility brings about, so attachment gives rise to suffering such as future rebirth in the 5 realms. Hostility brings about suffering such as sorrow in this life, as well as future suffering of the miserable realm. So hostility, anger, it's translated as also hatred. It's translated as sometimes, but it's all talking about the same thing, and that's that second poison. And it brings about suffering in this life and then suffering in our future lives when we experience the lower realms of cyclic existence. It says, while ignorance acts in a way as to maintain in existence the sufferings produced by the other two. So it's the basis for, and dependence upon this ignorance, the other two arise. So this attachment to happy feelings and this anger or hostility towards unhappy or painful feelings is arisen from and dependence upon this neutral feeling, which is referring to the ignorance, and then the ignorance is ignorance of the nature of reality and ignorance of karma and its results. So in dependence upon that, we have rise to attachment and anger or hatred.
다 droba 초아송래 내가네 가구스네 초아송래 내가네 가구스네 되나 초아 동행시수 초아 동행시수 어때 네 초아수 droba들 어때서 droba도 어때 초아도와라 동행도 때라 뇌차가사 초아도와라 동행이 맞다네 텔레집인 되셔도 가고 그랬어. 되셔도 가고 그랬어.
Oh, okay.
저
The good soudun.
어떤
주바.
주바들 주바.
Okay.
되는 소화도와라 동네들다네 때라 소화도와를 된 되사적으로 되사도 제마주바지 가고 그랬어. 되사가사 소화동에라 포부드나 동해지 주시비 포부드나 동해지 주시비 투바 임베 텔레 네 송어다르 송아 사벤 셰당가스 어디 소화 동해라 된 동해 용거에서 어디 동해도 네 가서 그래 셰당도 가고 그래서 셰당 콘도 가고 그래서 콘도지 마주 버지 그래서 콘도지 마주 버지 그래서 다 소화 단유라네 마다바다 세진 고비 라진도 때라 데모카드사 소화 단유라 때네 소화 단유는 마다바다 세진 고비 라진도 때라 데모카드스 소화 단유라 때 데모지고 저러도 어때 데모 마저지 그래서 대고나님을 뭐 말이바다 렌데라 뭐 말이바다가 그래서 소화송도 송지 좀 오스 소화송부터 되자 공도 데모송하고 좀 로하지 서서지 그래서 어디 송된 살
So number 6 shows how they cease. So it says, therefore, attachment ceases when you see pleasant feelings as suffering. In the case of, so one sees that the happy feelings are actually suffering feelings, so then the attachment to happy feelings ceases. Then number 2, in the case of painful feelings, so this is all number 6, in the case of painful feelings, hostility ceases when you consider that since these aggregates of body and mind are a collection of causes for suffering, painful feelings arise from them just as physical affliction does. So this is number 2, and this is how you get rid of the anger or hostility towards painful feelings, and then how we get rid of the ignorance of neutral that comes from neutral feelings is by, in the case of neutral feelings, ignorance ceases when you see that they are impermanent, exhaustible, and perishable in nature. So this is how we get rid of the ignorance that is from neutral feelings.
What that Dumba Teresa, that Dumba, Tadak Kuna, Tadak Kuna, what Dunga Truton, what the Sukanga Kunsuson to Sina,
Kongupa.
Kuna, Tadak Kuna, Nenju Shibisa,
Lesson.
Nenju Shibisa, Sata, Sanga, Nenju Shibisa, Tadak Kuna. Tada ne nenju shebi satan naba tenla do yu gomba jin de sheba os what the konto dumba do tre dumba de tada ge kone tada ne nenju shebi salu sondu sanga naba tenla do and sad nga do donani de do da kundu ni marbe and sad nga nenju shebi satan and do yu gombaji sheba was Chenrezig contres ta
Shansa yo maribe.
Shansa mondo nenju shebisa
Ale.
nenju shebisa ta
Ale.
ane doa donani na doa le son do
And then there's one more sentence still in number 6. In the case of neutral feelings, ignorance ceases when you see that impermanent, exhaustible, and imperishable in nature. In this way, you prevent the 3 feelings from giving rise to the 3 mental poisons. And then the number 7 is the origin of this. So we also have to correct that from before. It says, I have explained these points in accordance with the compendium of determinations and the levels of yogic deeds. This is referring to the text by Master Asanga. And when we look at those texts, there are the 5 treatises on the levels, and then the 2 compendiums. So we have the compendium of trainings, this is the compendium of determinations, it's called here, and then the compendium of the Mahayana. Let me see, I actually think that's... So, I'm sorry, compendium of knowledge and the compendium of Mahayana. The compendium of Mahayana, which is called Tepa Chembidua, is translated, I think, here as the compendium of determinations. And then there's also the compendium of knowledge, which is the Guntu. And then there are the 5 treatises on the levels of yogic practice, the compendium of ascertainments, the compendium of basis, compendium of enumerations, and the compendium of explanations. So this is what it's referring to, and I apologize for the mistranslating that. It was the levels of yogic deeds, not the bodhisattva levels.
Oh, that the Kasure, that was doing to the law, and then you should be sat on below Nisha's one. Then you should be sat the law to do zero, doing Sarta.
So the section that had on the according to the levels of yogic deeds and the compendium, which Jamyang Sheba has 7 categories of, is now completed, and now we move on to the middle way philosophy section.
Niba oma bilutar Sheba ne chaban duji ji duji ji chasu ji dunga dans tambre ane saji ji soala ngoni meba mesu dans what ni shegdwa ta tamud tere bana ko chenbo ko bana oma ba zu tala do bana de oma ba zu la wo sarwa bana ko chenbo chirwana ko de jizan ko go ba tazan do melas tanga su doji ni kan roba ina doji jigu na chaba ji kan roba ina an doji de kan do nge yoro do nge o ta gen asu te sun da ba re bana ko chenbo ko su doji ma re doji ngasu gibal ji kaya yoro ko chenbo chewa na ko de jezan ko go ba tazan do melas do menjin dos doji chebe jimban rogo ba ina an do yo maro do menjin do nyoa le be phombi do me ba example do me ba jin do en nyoa le be phombi ko yas
Okay.
saji nyoa le phombu de ngasu khore ko
Lasso.
na saji nyoa le phombu ngata ngasu ko nam so ko doji nam res
Lasso.
nyoa le be phombi ko ya jesi ko go ba de si do do hyawa des nyale phombo de ba tesi do an nga su do hyawa ma do saji re ma do o do yo ma do hyawa de phombo de la do nge ta nyamo je ne nge le ten cha ba ye bes le do nyamo bon ko nga su phombo de la an nyamo be ne nge le je su cha ba yo nyamo be ne nge le yo res Duji dunga duye na chaba duye dunga duye na tu dunga tata maybe kore shonyas chaba duye dunga duye ba ina ane dunga ju dunga tu kore mayba ina ya kore shonya tamata ya gunha su ne dunga toma jebe na Duji Dungene, Dungan Tangela, Chabadans. Duji Dungan, what the Dungan Chauduare, and then you Dungan Chauduar, Dungan Tangel Chauduares, Chaban Duji Dungas, what the Imbade, Chaban Duji Dungas, what the Chaban Duji Dungan, and then Chabas, Gala Chabarisana, Toa Dungele Chauduare, Diwali Chauduare, Chaban Duji Kunla Chauduar, Chaba. Duji Dungas, what the Secretaries, Chaba Tans, Dungan Jini, Dungan Jini, Zoy, Chaban Duji Dungan, you Dungan Zawares, Chaban Duji Dungan, you are not Telatene, Dungan Yungre, you Dungan Yungres, the La Chua Moto Gomos, the Len Chua Moto Gongurs, Santana, Nanjung Samba, Jivajigures. What the Tomadi said?
So this is the first section of the Madyamaka points. In the same way that someone bearing a heavy burden cannot be happy so long as the burden must be borne. Similar to the example that we gave about walking, so when somebody's carrying something, this feeling of suffering is there. It's present. So here you too will suffer so long as you carry the burden of the appropriated aggregates. So we have these contaminated aggregates currently. So the example of carrying something heavy that causes suffering is used to explain that if you have this type of suffering, then you necessarily will, if you have these appropriated aggregates, these contaminated aggregates, then you will necessarily have suffering. Though you have occasional moments when painful feeling is absent, because the aggregates are firmly embedded in dysfunctional tendencies of suffering and the afflictions, the suffering of conditionality is still present, and therefore myriad sufferings are just on the verge of arising in countless ways. Therefore, since the suffering of conditionality pervades all the suffering and is the root of the other two types of suffering, meditate on it often in order to become disenchanted with it. So here it's the reason, so this is where this term, so this term is the suffering of conditionality. We usually use pervasive compounded suffering because this type of suffering, it's called chapa duje. Chapa means it pervades it. So this is why we use this word pervasive, because it pervades all types of suffering. It pervades the feelings of happy feelings. It pervades feelings of suffering. So we find that if there is suffering there is this pervasive compounded suffering present. And that's why it is named as such, because it pervades these things. If there is the suffering of pervasive compounded suffering, there's the suffering of change and pain there as well. So lower, below this, there's quite a bit to go over, so in the future we'll go over it again. So there's just a little bit more to go over, and then we get into the individual suffering section. All right, so we'll do the concluding mandala offering and dedication prayer. And if that was at all confusing, the topic matter from the commentary side was difficult, and I did the best of my ability, and I think that it was mostly correct with terms and so forth. If I left anything out, I apologize. It was the first time I'm hearing some of this within that commentary. So we have the concluding mandala offering and dedication prayer. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I invite this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. I dedicate whatever virtues I have collected for the benefit of the teachings and of all sentient beings, and in particular, the essential teachings of Venerable Losang Drakpa to shine forever. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. I dedicate all this virtue to emulate the knowledge of the hero Manjushri and likewise Samantabhadra as well. with whatever dedication is praised as supreme by all the conquerors who traverse the 3 times, I also dedicate all my roots of virtue for the sake of auspicious deeds. And pure land surrounded by snow mountains, you are the source of all benefit and happiness. All-powerful Avalokiteshvara, Tenzin Gyatso, may you stay until samsara's end. I pray for the long life of the precious Khensur Wandak, holder of scriptural and realizational doctrines, the spiritual friend who trained extensively in the 5 great philosophical texts with exceptional wisdom and perseverance,